Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. TJ here. This is the first episode in a series called The Narcissist's Bag of Tricks. Well, the subject at hand is gaslighting. You may have heard this term before. It comes from a movie, which actually I have two of them, from the 40s. But it's not really an actual psychological term. It's something we've come up with, kind of like a slang, but we all know what it is, and if you don't, I'm here to share it with you. But basically, if you haven't seen the movie, which I strongly recommend seeing, either one of them, basically they involve this man who is so charming, who is so wonderful, and he's actually secretly an evil thief/murderer. Well, there's this woman in the story, played by Ingrid Bergman in one of the versions, and she has just lost the last living relative in her life, who happened to be an opera singer who was famous and owned supposedly some expensive or very valuable jewels. And a few years back, her relative had been murdered while she was a teen, and she was actually there when the thief escaped, or the murderer escaped, actually. So it turns out, several years later, this same man has targeted her, knowing that she has this house left to her, and he flirts with her and love bombs her, and they actually get married. So she falls for his charm because he's so wonderful. Well, the point here is they end up marrying, and then he says he wants them to move back into that house that she inherited. Keep in mind, it's the very house where she witnessed the murder, or didn't witness the murder, but was there during the murder of her relative. And she's like, I don't feel comfortable going back there because it has so many bad memories. Well, this man gaslights her, which we'll explain that in a moment, but he makes her think that maybe she's being too selfish or something like that. So she ends up saying, okay. And so they move back into the house. Well, he leaves all the time for work, and whenever he leaves, she notices footsteps up above in the attic, and she notices the gas lights, which they used back then in the old days, would dim in the house, which normally signifies somebody in another room has turned on a lamp or a light, so it dims the one that's already lit. So she would go to her servants or housekeepers and say, hey, did you notice the light going down? Did you notice the sounds upstairs? And they're like, no, we didn't. And the wonderful man has told them, his flying monkeys, he's told these servants, oh, she's not well. Oh, she's having trouble. She's having problems. Which, of course, she really isn't. But this makes it look like she is. So anyway, the point of the matter is, every time he leaves the house to supposedly go to work, he's actually entering the house from behind, up above, to go to the attic, because he's trying to find those jewels. But the wife is hearing these sounds, and he's, again, putting on his normal psychopath mask face and saying, oh, honey, you're imagining things. So that's where the term comes from, this movie, is that she is using her intuition and her senses to notice something's fishy, but when she talks to the husband, he's like, oh, honey, you're imagining things, just like the psychopath of today's world, or sociopath, or cluster B creature does today. They're doing it to maintain control of you. So I have a few real-life examples of modern-day gaslighting, and one of them would be during the love bombing stage. If you met someone just recently, and again, after one date, they're like texting you the next morning, good morning, baby, oh, you're so sexy, oh, I can't wait to see you, all that stuff. Well, if you were to approach them and say something, which I, again, don't recommend, but if you did, say, what's going on here? Why are you being so nice to me? We just met yesterday. Come on now. And the way they will gaslight you is, because you're really right. I mean, come on. You just met, and they're doing things your best friend would never do for you. And you have every right to be concerned, but guess what they'll say to gaslight? They will say, oh, come on, especially if you were previously abused by someone else in a relationship. Oh, they love that. So they might say, is it so hard to believe that someone might actually just like you? And they use that line or something like it, some variation of it, as if it's normal for a stranger to all of a sudden be there for your every need. But anyway, that's one example of a real life one. You'll be labeled as being paranoid or having trust issues when really you're responding to a valid gut feeling that tells you something's wrong here, and that's a clue for you if you meet somebody who responds that way. Anyway, the next one is, I have a friend who had been dating this man for years who didn't live in the same city as her, or the same state actually, and she would talk about him, and she asked him if he'd ever been married before, and he'd said no. Well, that's great. So she would talk to him on the phone a lot and only see him a few times a year. But evidently at one point he wasn't available to talk to her. He had to go really quick every time she called him. And he would say, "Oh, I've got to go to the hospital." "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, who are you visiting in the hospital?" And he'd say, "Oh, just a family friend." And she had a gut feeling something was fishy. So she said or asked, "You mean your wife?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah." And she said, "I thought you told me you'd never been married before." And his response was gaslighting. It was, "I said that?" To make her doubt her perception. Well, that's the whole point in this movie as well, is the lady is noticing things going on, but she's being told she's imagining things, and after a while she starts to believe that maybe she actually is losing her mind. Well, here's a case where he's trying to cover up he was married before, even though he swore he wasn't at a previous time. He's acting like that conversation never happened, and it did. So, and the third example is just the classic one you've probably heard before. But let's say you've met some new person who comes into your house regularly, and you have a habit of coming in after work, throwing your keys in a certain corner of the table, and then going about your business no matter what it is. Well, once this person enters the picture and comes over regularly, you are going out some night, and you go to your table, and your keys aren't there. Well, you're like, where are my keys? So you might say, "Where are my keys?" And of course, this sociopathic creature with their mask will be like, "Your keys? I haven't seen them." And they'll be very believable. But the truth is, they secretly took your keys into the bathroom and hid them over there on the counter just to mess with you, because they get off. They get their drug, their narcissistic supply from this. So they love to watch you as you scurry around thinking, "Where are my keys?" And they can use this at a later stage during devaluation and or discard phase or smear campaign, because they're trying again to make you think you're losing your mind. Even though, if you think about it critically, you don't have these problems around anybody else, just this person. But again, they're so convincing with their face, their mask, their acting, so they will convince you that you're imagining things. And you'll say things like, "I always put my keys there. How would they be in the bathroom?" And they'll say something like, "Well, maybe you're losing your mind," which is, again, not the case, but you may be tempted to believe it because they're so convincing in their performance. So gaslighting, again, not a psychological term as of yet or as of now, but these are just examples, because later during the smear campaign, when you start going to your peers and probably his flying monkeys, and you're saying, "I don't think he's really who he says he is," they'll probably have the seed already planted that you're losing it and you're losing your memory and your mind, and you'll just like play your part in the psychopath drama where you're looking confused, and it's all been orchestrated by this monster in the background. So gaslighting, be aware of it. It exists, and watch the movies.